With an abrupt and commanding presence, a bold voice sharply cuts through the absolute silence to introduce a sudden, dramatic shift in the narrative. Declaring his incredibly rigid expectations, he firmly insists that his newly intended bride must effortlessly bond with a younger girl he cherishes deeply as a surrogate sibling. Radiating absolute, overwhelming innocence, a bright-eyed girl with elaborate twin tails flashes a heart-melting, cheerful smile that completely dominates the visual space. Stricken by this highly unorthodox revelation, the elegant Cecilia visibly recoils as her sharp eyes widen in deeply troubled disbelief. The girl warmly offers her help if Cecilia ever feels unsure about anything. Expressing immense joy, the girl welcomes Cecilia to the family while noting she has lived in the estate since childhood. Angela insists there is no need to be formal, prompting Cecilia to politely introduce herself and ask for her guidance. A heavy, suffocating silence falls as Cecilia's sharp profile reveals a violent storm of internal conflict, her eyes downcast in deep, highly uncomfortable contemplation. Sensing the painfully obvious hesitation, her fiancé aggressively challenges Cecilia's subtle discomfort, daring her to question the perfectly established harmony of his household. Projecting a fragile veneer of absolute perfection, Cecilia suppresses her brewing anxiety and offers a flawlessly composed reassurance that they will undoubtedly bond wonderfully. Fixating her intense, unyielding gaze upon the stoic Lord Ralph, Cecilia directly and sharply questions the exact nature of his peculiar relationship with the energetic Lady Angela. Unveiling a genuinely tragic past, Ralph solemnly explains that they graciously absorbed Angela into their noble household after her parents suffered an untimely demise when she was merely 6 years old. Looming with an imposing, breathtaking architectural majesty, the sprawling estate stands proudly against the sky as a silent witness to generations of deeply buried secrets. Shattering any lingering illusions of blood relations, Ralph bluntly clarifies that the orphan girl is actually just the daughter of his own mother's beloved, lifelong friend. Cecilia immediately questions whether this means Lady Angela will permanently remain in their home from now on. Ralph affectionately recalls how he and Angela grew up in the house together like true siblings. Cecilia forces a polite acknowledgement, though her eyes betray deep sorrow. She flinches back slightly as the tension in the room thickens. Ralph sharply accuses Cecilia of finding Angela to be in the way. He firmly insists that Angela's presence is reassuring and that she will support Cecilia's adjustment to the unfamiliar household. Putting on a fake, cheerful smile, Angela nervously stammers out a denial. Ralph reveals that his mother had invited Angela to move to the southern estate, but she refused to leave her familiar home. He finishes his explanation, fully convinced of his own reasoning. He obliviously asks Cecilia if she feels safer having Angela around. The grand pillars of the mansion loom silently in the background. Cecilia shuts her eyes in sheer frustration, thinking it is unbearably awkward to live with her husband's childhood friend. She reflects on how her wealthy Sutherland family thrives in new industries while the once prestigious Garland family teeters on ruin with massive debt. Her father had advised her that they could call off the match, but he agreed to proceed with the meeting to save Duke Leonard's face despite the Garland family's fallen status. Stealing her absolute, unshakable resolve, Cecilia stubbornly turns her back on the far easier path of retreat, fully committing herself to the incredibly difficult road ahead. Staring intensely out the highly ornate window, she desperately grapples with the incredibly harsh realities of a complex situation she simply cannot afford to ignore at this critical juncture. Clinging to a highly precarious, forced optimism, she fiercely convinces herself that everything will ultimately fall into a perfect, harmonious rhythm despite the overwhelming odds. A breathtaking, dramatic close-up captures her immense, unwavering determination, her sharp eye gleaming with an intense, powerfully unyielding light. Bathed in spectacular, brilliant sunlight, the majestic dome of the grand estate rises triumphantly above a lush ocean of roses, signaling the magnificent dawn of a completely new era. Overflowing with boundless, explosive joy, a younger girl loudly praises the older sister's breathtaking, radiant beauty as the monumental wedding day finally commences. Echoing the overwhelming, pure adoration, a highly loyal maid emotionally declares that the majestic bride looks absolutely, undeniably breathtaking in her exquisite attire. Radiant Cecilia greets her proud parents in her full wedding attire. Her mother affectionately praises her wonderful appearance, sharing a tender and joyous family moment. However, her mother secretly whispers concerns to her father about marrying their daughter into a debt-buried marquis family. She laments the rushed finalization of the marriage, even while acknowledging Lord Ralph's kind nature. Cecilia calmly absorbs her parents' anxieties, projecting absolute confidence. Back in the present, Cecilia asks about the barren look of the estate's lands. She gently corrects him, pointing out that the land is far from empty. Ralph apologizes for bringing a wealthy count's daughter to his impoverished territory, admitting Duke Leonard arranged this. Cecilia's attention is suddenly captured by a cluster of distinct flowers growing nearby. Ralph dismisses the blooms as common weeds, entirely oblivious to their actual value. Cecilia crouches down, marveling at the lovely scent of blossoms that only thrive in dry eastern winds. Her eye widens as a sharp realization suddenly strikes her. A brilliant, lucrative idea sparks within her sharp merchant's mind. Catching herself acting like a merchant, she quickly apologizes to Ralph for speaking out of turn. She passionately pitches that if these unique flowers were blended into cosmetics or tea, they could become a wildly beloved and profitable resource. Reminiscing on Ralph's previous enthusiasm, Cecilia remembers him calling her business idea splendid. The fleeting memory of his encouragement lingers momentarily in her mind. She grapples with the sharp contrast between her gentle, modest fiancé and the shocking secret he kept. Frustration bubbles within her as she questions why Ralph concealed the existence of another woman in his life. A profound sense of betrayal shatters her belief that they could mutually support each other as partners. She recalls Ralph previously praising her wisdom and insight, claiming he had never considered such a lucrative perspective. Snapping her back to reality, a familiar male voice bluntly observes that she lacks the cheerfulness expected of a new bride. Spinning around in surprise, Cecilia excitedly greets her cousin Isaac, amazed he actually attended the wedding. Isaac casually mentions securing special leave from the Chancellor just to be present alongside brother Richard. Cecilia proudly praises his dedication, insisting he fully deserves such high recognition for his hard work. Brushing off the Chancellor rumors, Isaac expresses deep pride in his cousin despite his highly demanding schedule. Staring at her childhood protector, Cecilia warmly remembers how he always played alongside Richard and kept her safe. Isaac softly reassures her that she can continue calling him brother without any hesitation. A nostalgic warmth fills the air as the two share a tender, unspoken moment of familial bonding. Surprised by a sudden realization, Cecilia gazes at him warmly, grateful for his steady presence. She shockingly confesses that Isaac felt more like a true brother than Richard, who always treated her like a nuisance. Noticing his sudden shift in demeanor, she asks why he is sulking for no apparent reason. Cecilia teasingly admits she worried he came merely to forget about her. Stepping closer, Isaac softly calls out her name, breaking her teasing train of thought. The air crackles with unresolved tension as their eyes lock intently in the quiet hallway. Clicking his tongue in mild annoyance, Isaac drops his playful facade and stares at her deeply. He intensely demands that she find happiness, vowing he will never stop chasing her if she fails to do so. Flustered by his smooth-tongued palace rhetoric, Cecilia sharply calls his name in surprise. Her tense expression melts into a fond smile as she gently chides her overly protective cousin. The heartwarming reunion shatters as Lord Ralph approaches with Lady Angela trailing suspiciously behind him. Ralph gasps in sheer amazement, loudly complimenting Cecilia on her absolutely radiant and beautiful appearance. Beside him, Angela mockingly apologizes to her mother-in-law for blatantly ignoring instructions and wearing a white dress. Cecilia's eyes widen in absolute horror as she registers Angela's highly inappropriate and disrespectful bridal attire. Oblivious to the thick tension, Angela swoons over the dreamlike feeling of welcoming such a beautiful bride. Ralph awkwardly tries to address the dress issue, but Angela quickly cuts him off with an innocent, manipulative smile. She boldly justifies her actions, claiming she wore her favorite dress specifically to celebrate Ralph's special day. A suffocating silence blankets the room as Angela's audacious disrespect hangs heavily in the air. Cecilia clenches her jaw, fighting desperately to maintain her composure in the face of this brazen insult. Tension radiates from Isaac as he coldly observes the unfolding spectacle with narrowed eyes. Pressuring his bride, Ralph incorrectly and foolishly assumes Cecilia does not mind the blatant disrespect. Desperate to keep the peace, Ralph firmly urges everyone to stop arguing on such an important day. Clapping his hands together, he cheerfully directs the entire wedding party to head toward the chapel. Cecilia silently follows his lead, her heart heavy with a suddenly building dread. Leaning in close, Isaac interrogates Cecilia about the strange woman, confirming she is just a friend's daughter and not actual family. He glares sharply at Angela's retreating back, his protective instincts flaring at the bizarre dynamic. Suppressing her own outrage, Cecilia firmly states she simply wants to avoid conflict on her wedding day. Isaac's expression darkens considerably as he struggles to accept her uncharacteristically passive stance. Forcing a polite smile, Cecilia gracefully dismisses Isaac and tells him to enjoy the ceremony. The grand doors of the chapel loom ahead, signaling the inescapable point of no return for the young bride. Sunlight streams through the stained glass, illuminating the majestic altar where their fates will inevitably intertwine. Standing before the priest, the couple finally prepares to officially seal their lifelong marital vows. Looking straight ahead, Ralph firmly says, "I do," when asked to love and support Cecilia in sickness and health. Swallowing her lingering doubts, Cecilia echoes the sacred vow to take Ralph as her lawfully wedded husband. The priest formally commands the bride and groom to seal their promises and exchange the rings. Slipping the ring onto her finger, Ralph softly reassures a tense Cecilia that everything is completely all right. Clutching Lord Ralph's hand tightly, Cecilia envisions a bright future where eternal happiness awaits them both. The stunning couple walks gracefully down the ornate aisle, bathed in the warm glow of their seemingly perfect wedding day. Standing before the grand altar, they gaze deeply into each other's eyes as the sacred ceremony commences. The solemn vows hang in the air, binding the hopeful bride and her gentle groom in holy matrimony. Suddenly, a heavy thud disrupts the quiet reverence of the chapel as someone collapses to the stone floor. Panic erupts through the startled crowd as desperate cries ring out, questioning if Lady Angela is all right. Gasps of pure shock echo across the pews as the wedding guests witness the sudden, chaotic interruption. Abandoning his bride instantly, a horrified Ralph spins around and violently screams Angela's name. He completely disregards the ceremony, rushing to the fallen girl's side while frantically asking if she is hurt. Cradled in his arms, a weak and trembling Angela softly whispers Ralph's name, cementing his undivided attention. Left entirely alone at the altar, Cecilia stares in bewildered heartbreak, wondering why her husband abandoned her so easily. Chaos swallows the chapel as bewildered guests murmur nervously, desperately trying to understand what in the world is happening. Sweeping the frail girl into his arms, Ralph holds Angela securely against his chest with protective desperation. The flustered priest hastily orders the groom to take the unconscious lady to her room at once. Staring down at her with intense worry, Ralph gently asks Angela if she is all right as he prepares to carry her away. Without a shred of hesitation, Ralph loudly begs for forgiveness and announces he is stepping out, utterly abandoning his wedding. He sprints frantically out of the chapel doors with Angela in his arms, leaving a stunned silence in his wake. Standing frozen in her gorgeous white gown, a shattered Cecilia can only murmur a hollow, defeated agreement. Whispers ripple through the crowd as guests recall Angela weakly claiming she merely felt a little faint. Cecilia's eyes widen in stark disbelief, utterly bewildered by the sheer absurdity of the situation unfolding around her. Skeptical of the convenient timing, she wonders if Angela is secretly battling a terrible illness, just as Isaac gently calls her name. Snapping her out of her stunned daze, a concerned Isaac approaches the forsaken bride to ask if she is all right. Forcing a brave and polite smile, Cecilia masks her profound shock and insists that everything is completely fine. She softly thanks Brother Isaac for his comforting presence, grateful for a familiar anchor amidst the humiliating disaster. A sympathetic relative sighs heavily, explaining that the pitiful girl has suffered from these dramatic fainting spells since childhood. The relative clarifies that Angela lacks a specific chronic illness but has simply always possessed a terribly frail constitution. A sickening realization washes over Cecilia as she understands she must sit humiliated at the altar and wait for his return. The harsh truth strikes like a dagger when she learns Ralph always stays right by Angela's side whenever she collapses. Her heart sinks as the grim reality sets in, confirming that this deeply inappropriate dynamic is absolutely nothing new. The gossiping guests exchange incredibly awkward glances, fully realizing the severe indignity inflicted upon the new bride. Bursting back into the chapel, Ralph hastily confirms Angela is all right and casually thanks everyone for their concern. He offers a remarkably shallow apology for keeping his beautiful bride waiting at the altar like an afterthought. With a forced, oblivious cheerfulness, Ralph commands the priest to simply resume the interrupted ceremony as if nothing happened. A stunned guest softly calls out Lord Ralph's name, astounded by his brazenly dismissive attitude toward the wedding. The ceremony hastily resumes, rushing through the final sacred rites amidst a thick, uncomfortable tension. Ralph finally seals the marriage with his bride, though the magical spark of the day has been permanently extinguished. Polite applause echoes through the grand hall as the newly wedded couple officially concludes the turbulent ceremony. However, during the lavish reception, an unapologetic Ralph casually announces he needs to step out once again. Without waiting for an answer, he swiftly turns his back on his own wedding party and marches out the reception doors. Cecilia stands completely isolated in the middle of the crowded hall, a newlywed bride utterly forsaken by her groom. Scandalized whispers erupt across the ballroom as guests express shock that he abandoned a reception that isn't even finished. The aristocrats eagerly gossip, accurately deducing that the devoted groom rushed off to check on Lady Angela yet again. Desperately trying to save face, Cecilia warmly greets Duke Leonard as he approaches to compliment the radiant bride. Covering for her absent husband, she politely thanks the proud matchmaker and smoothly lies that Ralph only stepped out momentarily. Leonard subtly warns her not to get jealous, condescendingly insisting that Ralph and Angela are strictly just childhood friends. He rationalizes Ralph's obsessive behavior by citing Angela's collapse, leaving Cecilia stunned that even the Duke knows of their inseparable bond. Swallowing her rising disgust, Cecilia forces a stiff smile and obediently claims she understands the toxic dynamic perfectly. In a fading memory, Duke Leonard confidently leaves the rest to a smiling Ralph, commanding him to treat Cecilia kindly. Before departing the estate, a tearful Emilia begs her big sister to promise she will write letters home. Promising to take care of herself, Cecilia bids a final, somber farewell to her worried mother as she faces her new, isolated life. As Cecilia warmly thanks her brother Isaac, he earnestly promises to come flying at a moment's notice should anything happen, urging her to contact him immediately. Presenting a mysterious, valuable object, Isaac gently extends his hand to offer it to his beloved sister. Acknowledging the immense worry she caused today, Cecilia bravely declares that she will be completely fine and remains fiercely determined to make this new situation work. He quickly reassures her that the item is nothing strange as she gazes in utter wonder at the beautifully crafted ring. A striking close-up reveals a magnificent signet ring, intricately engraved with a majestic shield and crossed swords. Cecilia stares with wide, startled eyes at the unexpected and clearly significant family heirloom placed suddenly before her. Though she initially protests accepting something of such grand importance, he firmly instructs her to use it to instantly summon him the moment trouble arrives. With a gentle yet commanding gesture, he places the heavy, beautifully engraved signet ring directly into her delicate, waiting palm. He elaborates that the ring is a powerful token of his elite status, guaranteeing his absolute protection if she ever shows it at the capital offices. Moved by his unwavering, protective warmth, a soft, immensely grateful smile finally touches Cecilia's elegant features. Yielding to his heartfelt familial devotion, she graciously accepts the vital token with profound gratitude. Clasping her hands securely within his own, he passionately pleads for her to keep the ring close at all times. Gazing up at the towering estate, Cecilia resolves to embrace her new role as the lady of the house, deciding to move past the disastrous wedding to avoid worrying her family any further. As she surveys the expansive, pristine grounds, a sudden wave of nostalgia hits her, remembering that the loyal estate staff have been here since her childhood. Formal household introductions officially begin as James, the distinguished butler, and Martha, the stern head maid, are respectfully presented to Lady Cecilia. A sharp, intense close-up of a highly critical eye scrutinizes the new lady of the house with undeniable, chilling suspicion. An angry shock flashes across Martha's aged face as she suddenly recognizes Cecilia as the very woman who was present when the fragile Angela fainted. Masking her initial disdain, Martha bows stiffly and formally welcomes Lady Cecilia, hollowly proclaiming it a profound honor to serve her. The tense conversation shifts to strict familial obligations as it is revealed that these new household arrangements were specifically mandated by her esteemed father-in-law's wishes. Recognizing Cecilia's glaring lack of personal staff, a polite but incredibly firm request is made for Martha to immediately assign her a dedicated attendant. Cecilia brilliantly maintains her regal composure, her stoic, unbothered gaze fixed steadily ahead as the tense household dynamics subtly unfold around her. A dark, incredibly hostile glare emanates from the seasoned head maid Martha, her sharp, calculating eyes betraying a deep-seated, simmering resentment. With thinly veiled calculation, Martha readily agrees and decisively assigns the supposedly quick-witted and reliable Anna to serve the new bride. While the boisterous new maid Anna excitedly praises her stunning appearance, a weary Cecilia quietly sighs, deeply missing her familiar, comforting attendant Mary. As Cecilia contemplates Martha's surprisingly difficult and emotional nature, a sudden, panicked scream echoing through the halls for Lady Angela shatters the quiet atmosphere. Releasing a heavy, profoundly anxious breath, Cecilia closes her eyes as the chaotic, unpredictable reality of her new household begins to truly sink in. The crushing weight of the tense, frantic environment leaves an undeniable feeling of overwhelming nervousness hanging thickly in the cold air. Clad in a delicate, ruffled nightgown, a solitary Cecilia sits nervously at the edge of her massive, agonizingly empty marital bed. Staring out the dark, lonely window while eagerly awaiting her husband, Cecilia is abruptly cheered on by her overly enthusiastic new maid. Trembling with self-doubt, Cecilia desperately wishes her old maid Mary were there to prepare her, anxiously questioning if she looks completely all right for her wedding night. The heavy, suffocating silence is violently shattered as Lord Ralph bursts dramatically into the bedchamber, taking a startled Cecilia completely by surprise. Pausing with a distracted, utterly weary expression, Ralph barely registers his beautiful new bride's presence as he mutters a confused hum. Completely ignoring the intimate, romantic setting, Ralph abruptly announces his urgent need to leave and check on the fragile Angela once again. Offering a quick, hollow apology, Ralph hastily explains away his insulting absence by claiming he must have accidentally dozed off. Prioritizing another woman entirely on his wedding night, Ralph calmly states that he will stay with the anxious Angela for a while longer. As he bluntly reiterates that Angela is still completely unwell, a deeply crushed Cecilia can only utter a tiny, heartbroken gasp of painful realization. A devastating wave of pure betrayal washes over the young bride as a singular, agonizing thought of protest forms uselessly in her mind. The cruel, unyielding reality of her loveless, neglected position within this grand estate finally becomes undeniably and painfully clear to her. Gripping the pristine bedsheets in a tight, trembling fist of suppressed sorrow, Cecilia forces out a quiet, utterly defeated phrase acknowledging her swift abandonment. Letting out a heavy, manipulative sigh, Ralph begs for her understanding, weaponizing the sacred concept of family to wildly justify his inexcusable abandonment of his new wife. Gently tilting her chin up in a mocking display of husbandly affection, Ralph smoothly asks for forgiveness and promises to return only after Angela is fully settled. Leaning in to deliver a hollow, obligatory embrace, he casually and cruelly drops a deceptive declaration of his love for her. The bright sun rises over the sprawling, silent estate, casting long, lonely shadows across the imposing architecture as a new, unforgiving day mercilessly begins. Bathed in the cold, unfeeling light of morning, a completely shattered Cecilia remains frozen on the exact same spot on the meticulously made, empty marital bed. The suffocating, depressive silence of the lonely morning is abruptly shattered when the overly eager Anna barges excitedly into the bedroom unannounced. Rubbing her exhausted, tear-stained eyes in quiet disbelief, Cecilia groans in absolute misery as she realizes she has spent her entire wedding night completely alone. Snapping out of her depressive, sleep-deprived daze, Cecilia turns her weary, heavy gaze toward the energetic servant and softly calls out her name. Bursting with an highly inappropriate amount of cheerful energy, Anna delivers a bright, booming morning greeting to the devastatingly exhausted newlywed. Without a single ounce of tact, the oblivious maid casually informs Cecilia that her husband is already enjoying a pleasant breakfast with Lady Angela. Ignoring the maid's useless question about dining in her room, a hardened, fiercely resolute Cecilia immediately demands to know the exact whereabouts of her truant husband. Refusing to eat alone, a determined Cecilia firmly declares her intention to join her husband and Angela. Shock washes over the young bride as Anna casually reveals that a seemingly recovered Angela has already joined Ralph in the dining hall. Sensing the awkward tension, the maid hesitantly offers to bring the morning meal directly to the bedchamber instead. Approaching the heavy wooden doors, Cecilia overhears the boisterous, carefree chatter echoing from within the grand dining room. A joyful, mocking laugh erupts from Angela as she playfully teases Ralph for being absolutely terrible. Chuckling warmly at her banter, Ralph defends his humorous remarks while Angela continuously praises his endless jokes. Pushing open the doors with a heavy heart, Cecilia steps into the room and immediately disrupts their intimate morning gathering. Blinking in mild surprise, Ralph completely breaks off his joyful conversation to greet his new bride with a casual good morning. Suppressing her profound disappointment with a quiet acknowledgement, Cecilia listens as Ralph weakly claims he planned to visit her after breakfast. Shifting uncomfortably in his seat, the negligent husband offers a hollow, rapid apology for his glaring absence. Deflecting the blame entirely, Ralph explains that the head maid Martha assured him newlyweds typically prefer taking their post-wedding breakfast in bed. Standing her ground, Cecilia coldly points out that he still could have spoken to her directly before deciding to dine with another woman. Interjecting with feigned innocence, Angela offers a sickeningly sweet apology for supposedly ruining the couple's special day. Narrowing her eyes in silent realization, Cecilia mentally questions if the hostile head maid truly orchestrated this cruel isolation. Feigning utter shock, Angela loudly gasps and asks if the abandoned bride actually stayed up waiting for her husband all night. Weaponizing her fragile status, Angela begs Cecilia not to be upset and insists that the three of them must now live in perfect harmony. A wave of absolute dread crashes over Cecilia as she internally panics over the terrifying prospect of Angela staying at the estate forever. Steeling her nerves, Cecilia firmly interrupts the manipulative apologies by directly addressing her truant husband. Desperate to carve out some private time, the young wife elegantly requests that Ralph personally show her around the estate's beautiful gardens. Instantly prioritizing his childhood friend's health, Ralph anxiously asks Angela if a garden stroll would be too exhausting after her severe illness. Smiling with calculated sweetness, an undeterred Angela immediately ruins the private invitation by cheerfully announcing she will join them. A suffocating, heavy silence descends upon the room as the three instantly lock into a tense, unspoken standoff. To Cecilia's immense relief, Ralph finally takes a stand and firmly instructs the pouting Angela to remain inside and rest. Escorting his wife through the vibrant greenery, Ralph proudly gestures to the magnificent garden that served as his grandfather's ultimate pride and joy. Chuckling at a fond memory, Ralph reminisces about a young, incredibly stubborn Angela demanding pink roses instead of the traditional white. Staring blankly at the vibrant petals, he warmly recounts how the demanding girl relentlessly begged his mother to plant them specifically for her. Pausing her peaceful walk, Cecilia casts a sharp, highly observant glance toward her deeply nostalgic husband. Gathering every ounce of her fleeting courage, the young bride prepares to ask the burning question that has haunted her since her disastrous wedding. Staring directly into his eyes, Cecilia bluntly demands to know if he is actually in love with the fragile Angela. A chilling, dangerous silence instantly freezes the warm garden air as a look of pure, unadulterated shock morphs across Ralph's face. Stammering in absolute disbelief, Ralph struggles to form a single coherent word as the heavy accusation hangs between them. His initial confusion rapidly twists into a dark, defensive rage as he processes the full weight of her bold insinuation. Glaring with a terrifying intensity, Ralph steps aggressively toward his trembling wife with his fists clenched tightly at his sides. Exploding in furious indignation, he viciously accuses Cecilia of having a rotten core to even harbor such wildly inappropriate thoughts. Crying out in sudden pain, Cecilia violently flinches as her enraged husband brutally grabs her arm to emphasize his blistering anger. Spewing venomous insults, Ralph angrily condemns her perfectly valid suspicions as nothing more than a filthy and utterly disgraceful notion. Towering over her shrinking frame, he furiously demands to know if she intends to keep pushing this wildly offensive accusation. Refusing to completely back down, Cecilia desperately tries to justify her fears by pointing out his incredibly suspicious behavior. Cutting her off with a final, booming roar, Ralph fiercely reiterates that Angela is absolutely nothing more than a cherished sister to him. Turning his back in absolute disgust, the furious lord storms away and leaves his devastated bride standing completely alone in the sprawling garden. Collapsing heavily onto the manicured grass, a physically and emotionally drained Cecilia releases a sharp gasp of pure anguish. Clutching her chest in deep regret, the heartbroken newlywed harshly berates herself for recklessly confronting him and running her mouth. A sudden, blinding flash of painful nostalgia overtakes her mind as she desperately searches her memories for a source of familiar comfort. Transported back to her innocent youth, she vividly recalls screaming in absolute terror as her playful brother shoved a repulsive, multi-legged bug in her face. Shaking off the vibrant hallucination, Cecilia snaps back to reality with a violent jolt as the heavy weight of her marital disaster crushes her spirit. Trapped in an agonizing cycle of doubt, The weeping bride desperately wants to trust her husband but deeply fears leaving their shattered relationship like this. A soft, unexpected rustling sound from the nearby bushes instantly breaks through her spiraling cycle of depression and regret. Startled by the sudden intrusion, Cecilia spins around defensively as an unfamiliar voice weakly calls out through the thick foliage. Struggling to make sense of the disjointed, desperate whispers promising to make it up to her, Cecilia slowly rises to her feet. A sharp gasp escapes her trembling lips as she locks eyes with the mysterious, unexpected figure emerging from the garden shadows. Dismissing her completely valid suspicions, Ralph insists her strange doubts stem entirely from bridal nervousness. Catching his breath after the tense confrontation, the conflicted husband attempts to soften his previous harsh outburst. Admitting his glaring lack of kindness, Ralph gently claims her raw nerves are simply adjusting to their sudden marriage. While Cecilia silently doubts the fragile girl's manipulative intentions, Ralph insists Angela truly wishes to forge a deep bond. Defending his childhood friend's incredibly clingy behavior, he explains that the sickly girl never had any other playmates. Stepping closer to his wary bride, Ralph passionately pleads for her to believe just one crucial, fundamental truth. Heavily banking on her inherent goodness, he trusts Cecilia's gentle nature will effortlessly bridge the gap with the hostile Angela. A flicker of painful realization clouds Cecilia's eyes as she mentally processes his deeply biased, unfair expectations. Delivering a massive emotional blow, Ralph explicitly declares that both his new wife and his childhood friend are equally precious. Stunned by this outrageous, insulting equivalence, the devastated bride falls into a heavy, heartbroken silence. Swallowing her immense pride and sorrow, the utterly defeated Cecilia quietly murmurs her forced, agonizing compliance. Later that morning, a resolute Cecilia firmly confronts her insolent maid Anna over a terribly freezing basin of wash water. Scooping up the icy liquid with terrifying calm, the young lady prepares to demonstrate her unyielding point directly. Smirking with open disrespect, Anna stubbornly defends the freezing water and blatantly dismisses the bride's valid complaint. Startled by Cecilia's sudden, aggressive movement, the smug maid watches her lady step forward with absolute, chilling authority. Shrieking in absolute shock, Anna violently flinches as Cecilia coldly splashes the freezing water directly onto the servant's face. Wiping her dripping face in furious disbelief, Anna mutters a deeply venomous insult regarding the bride's completely abandoned wedding bed. Seeking genuine solace elsewhere, Cecilia respectfully asks the elderly butler James for his honest opinion of the grand estate. Brushing off the horrific staff disrespect, she determinedly vows to properly earn her rightful place within these hostile walls. Watching the resilient young woman with wide eyes, James feels a glimmer of genuine, unexpected respect blossom in his chest. Bowing with deep courtesy, James graciously offers his absolute assistance after wrapping up the extensive estate tour. Clinging to a desperate glimmer of hope, Cecilia theorizes that greatly improving the estate will finally win her husband's elusive affections. Eager to fulfill her aristocratic duties, Cecilia excitedly asks if replacing the dreary decor is possible provided she covers the heavy costs. James shamefully admits that the mansion's incredibly worn, outdated appearance stems entirely from a severe, crippling lack of funds. Word of the wealthy new bride's grand renovation plans instantly sends massive ripples of joyous excitement through the local merchant guilds. Overwhelmed but completely energized, Cecilia stares down a colossal, intimidating stack of lavish interior design catalogs. Eager to breathe vibrant new life into her marital home, she happily flips through the gorgeous, high-quality fabric samples. Hoping to finally win over the hostile staff, the optimistic bride eagerly asks if the beautiful renovations will boost the mansion's overall morale. Carefully comparing exquisite, luxurious swatches, Cecilia narrows her sophisticated choices down to two perfectly elegant designs. A soft, genuinely happy smile graces her lips as she envisions a much brighter, warmer future within this massive home. Bursting uninvited into the quiet room, a frantic Angela wildly demands confirmation about the sudden, sweeping interior changes. Following closely behind the chaotic girl, Ralph smoothly compliments his wife's undeniably excellent and refined tastes. Blinking in mild, hesitant surprise, Cecilia gracefully accepts her husband's incredibly rare display of genuine praise. Completely ignoring the chosen elegant swatches, Angela loudly declares that the entire gloomy mansion must absolutely be covered in blinding pink. Taken utterly aback, Cecilia politely questions if the fragile girl possesses some deep sentimental attachment to such a terribly outdated aesthetic. Missing the rising, dangerous tension entirely, Ralph foolishly voices his full, unwavering support for Angela's absurd, childish vision. Cutting off the bride's polite refusal, Angela aggressively stomps her foot and demands total, unquestioning compliance. Stunned by the sheer, unadulterated audacity, Cecilia stares blankly at the demanding, highly manipulative interloper. Smirking with dark triumph, Angela viciously weaponizes a supposed promise from the previous, deceased lady of the house. Readily enabling her blatant manipulation, Ralph instantly validates the ancient, highly convenient promise regarding the hideous pink redesign. Feeling her hard-earned authority rapidly slipping away, Cecilia tightly questions this incredibly suspicious and timely revelation. Swallowing her mounting, explosive frustration, the rightful lady of the house violently attempts to maintain her precarious composure. Delivering the ultimate crushing insult, Ralph casually strips his wife of her sacred duties and hands the entire renovation over to Angela. Shrugging with infuriating, careless indifference, he effectively sides with his demanding childhood friend over his own stunned bride. Trying to poorly smooth over the blatant disrespect, he offers a thoroughly empty, meaningless apology on the brat's behalf. Standing her ground with fierce, unyielding dignity, Cecilia firmly reminds him that managing the estate interior is her absolute right. Completely missing the massive point, Ralph aggressively scolds her for being inflexible and insists she bow to Angela's supposed seniority. A cold, horrifying realization completely paralyzes the young bride as her husband's absolute betrayal violently sinks into her bones. Clueless to the massive emotional damage he just brutally inflicted, Ralph casually suggests a relaxing stroll through the gardens. Turning his back on her utterly shattered pride, he gently calls out her name as if nothing devastating just occurred. Questioning her husband's twisted loyalties, Cecilia bluntly asks if she is truly expected to prioritize the fragile girl before herself. Stunned by the utterly ridiculous expectation, the young bride repeats his insulting phrase about household operations in absolute disbelief. Condescendingly dismissing her valid concerns, Ralph blindly insists that the new bride simply fails to understand the established, toxic dynamics. Desperate to assert her rightful place, Cecilia sharply reminds the neglectful lord that he has yet to even set foot inside her bedchamber. Feigning a deep sense of aristocratic duty, Ralph weakly claims he is merely striving to do what is absolute best for the grand estate. Brushing off her profound loneliness, he coldly accuses his frustrated wife of vastly exaggerating the temporary household tension. Gripped by a crushing wave of despair, Cecilia silently questions her agonizing purpose within this airless, Angela-centric mansion. Hot tears prick the isolated bride's weary eyes as she violently grapples with her profoundly heartbreaking, unloved reality. Letting out a heavy, utterly defeated sigh, the neglected wife desperately struggles to maintain her rapidly crumbling composure. A bitter, stinging realization violently hits her as she realizes nearly an entire agonizing month has passed in total marital neglect. Finally cracking under her undeniable logic, a deeply hesitant Ralph quietly agrees to personally speak with his overly dependent childhood friend. Exploding in massive, highly manipulative tears, Angela viciously accuses Ralph of cruelly abandoning her to her terrifying chronic illness. Backed by the fiercely loyal Martha, a hysterical Angela aggressively demands to know if his sacred promises to never leave her behind were absolute lies. Overwhelmed by the intense, calculated emotional blackmail, a deeply conflicted Ralph stares helplessly at the weeping, fragile parasite. The suffocating, heavy silence violently stretches on as the toxic household dynamic tightly traps the young lord in a web of eternal guilt. Returning to his bride with a deeply exhausted sigh, Ralph foolishly announces his supposed grand victory in reasoning with the dramatic girl. A sudden flicker of genuine shock and extremely cautious hope brilliantly illuminates Cecilia's weary, beautiful face. Offering a surprisingly soft, reassuring smile, the truant husband seemingly commits to finally repairing his heavily fractured marital bond. Delivering a completely infuriating command, he eagerly instructs his wife to explicitly thank Angela for graciously allowing them a single night together. Barely suppressing her rising disgust at the absurd phrasing, Cecilia feigns joyful relief at Angela's supposedly massive sacrifice to endure loneliness. Stepping closer with a sudden spark of newfound intimacy, Ralph softly murmurs his beautiful bride's name into the quiet, charged room. Delivering a firm, highly romantic promise, He commands her to patiently await his arrival in her bedchambers later that exact evening. The incredibly fragile peace shatters instantly as a smiling Angela rudely interrupts Cecilia's quiet, solitary afternoon without a single knock. Attempting to firmly assert her rightful aristocratic status, the dignified wife calmly references her massive, ongoing responsibilities to Garland House. Sneering viciously at Cecilia's diligent efforts, Angela dismissively claims she could never possibly enjoy such boring, utterly tedious hobbies. Ignoring the incredibly thick tension, the obnoxious interloper carelessly pivots the loaded conversation directly towards Cecilia's delicate embroidery work. Dripping with sickeningly sweet venom, Angela patronizingly thanks the stunned bride for supposedly agreeing to the highly anticipated evening arrangements. Dropping an absolutely devastating bombshell, the manipulative girl cheerfully demands that Cecilia bear a healthy child for her to creatively name. Completely and utterly bewildered by the sheer, unadulterated audacity, Cecilia freezes in place with a sharp gasp of pure shock. The toxic parasite smirks with terrifying, unhinged delight as she watches the young bride's absolute, horrified confusion rapidly unfold. Feigning completely innocent surprise, Angela sadistically twists the knife by revealing Ralph's secret, horrifying promise to hand over complete naming rights. Weaponizing her chronic fragility, Angela triumphantly exposes Ralph's deeply twisted declaration that their future biological child would belong equally to her. Spinning a deeply psychotic, terrifying fantasy, the delusional girl brightly claims the title of Mama Angela while vowing to endlessly dote on the unborn baby. Flashing a violently unhinged, mocking smile, she sadistically taunts the paralyzed bride about the agonizing, deadly battle of human childbirth. A sudden, vivid flashback violently rips through time to reveal a younger, immensely frustrated child brutally criticizing the sickly Angela's glaring ignorance. The intense, humiliating academic memory directly centers around the pathetic girl's complete inability to recall the incredibly famous Battle of Farson. Taunting the deeply embarrassed girl without mercy, a young peer loudly urges a defensive Ralph to force Angela into studying much harder. Crushed instantly by the relentless, mocking childhood teasing, a tiny, deeply pathetic Angela bursts into uncontrollable, highly humiliating tears. Stepping aggressively and protectively in front of his weeping friend, a fierce, young Ralph firmly blocks the harsh path of her cruel tormentors. The dark narrative violently shifts to a highly solemn memory of a grave, dying woman laying incredibly frail in her massive, shadowed bed. Bound forever by a highly sacred deathbed vow to his mother, Ralph solemnly swears to eternally protect the orphaned, plague-surviving girl. Escaping the overwhelming, vicious childhood cruelty, a deeply determined Ralph forcefully drags the loudly crying girl far away from the local playground. The cruel, echoing laughter of the local neighborhood children rings violently in the chaotic, brightly sunlit background of his deeply traumatized memory. Sobbing violently with calculated precision, the pathetic girl weaponizes her inherent weakness and fiercely accuses everyone of viciously mocking her fragile state. Thrashing in wild, completely unhinged hysteria, she screams at the imaginary cruelty of the world while Ralph desperately tries to calm her rising panic. Driven heavily by extreme guilt and deeply misplaced duty, Ralph brutally internalizes the massive, lifelong burden of being her sole, eternal protector. Snapping violently at her harsh critics, the furious young lord loudly and aggressively declares it an absolute, unforgivable sin to mock the incredibly weak. Basking warmly in his fierce, utterly unwavering protection, a deeply obsessed Angela gazes up at her valiant knight with terrifying, starry-eyed adoration. Clinging desperately to his strong, capable arm, the highly manipulative parasite silently vows to never, ever let her precious savior slip away. Taking her small, frail hand with absolute, blinding devotion, the fiercely loyal Ralph successfully leads his eternal, toxic burden safely back to the grand estate. Reflecting on his twisted dependency, a weary Ralph violently scoffs at the absurd notion of ever being called a noble prince. A vivid flashback violently transports the narrative to a much simpler time, revealing a young Ralph sitting closely beside the frail Angela. Trembling with deep-seated social anxiety, the sickly girl stubbornly refuses to attend Sunday's tea party out of a terrifying fear of being bullied. Enabling her toxic isolation, the young boy firmly abandons his chance to socialize and fiercely vows to stay hidden away with Angela. Looking back on their secluded youth, Ralph guiltily admits that hiding in their comfortable little world completely shielded him from his own crippling inferiority complex. Snapping violently back to the tense present, the fiercely loyal head-maid Martha aggressively accuses someone of driving a wedge between Ralph and Lady Angela. Shock ripples through the gossiping estate staff as they realize Ralph had absolutely no choice but to accept a marriage brokered by the powerful Duke Leonard. Weeping openly in the grand hallways, the dramatic maids loudly lament the supposedly tragic fate of the fragile Angela being brutally left behind. Overhearing the vicious servant gossip, a deeply frustrated Ralph silently decides to let the rumors slide rather than humiliatingly confess his family's severe financial ruin. Completely misreading the toxic dynamic, the weeping servants blindly romanticize the situation as a heartbreakingly tragic romance for the poor, sickly girl. Whispers of his sudden, high-profile engagement to the incredibly wealthy Sutherland heiress continue to echo relentlessly through the sprawling manor. Despite his undeniable attachment to his childhood friend, Ralph pragmatically rationalizes that the utterly helpless Angela could never financially save his ruined estate. Oblivious peers excitedly congratulate the young lord on striking it massive by marrying into the absolute wealthiest family in the entire kingdom. Weeping with calculated precision, a terrified Angela violently tugs on his sleeve and asks if his new marriage means she will be completely thrown away. Looking up with wide, impossibly desperate eyes, the manipulative parasite silently begs her eternal protector to never abandon her. Yielding entirely to her intense emotional blackmail, Ralph fiercely promises to protect her at all costs if Cecilia ever dares to treat her like a burden. Blinded by his own extreme delusion, the foolish lord casually assumes the two drastically different women will simply get along without any issues. Basking in his absolute, unwavering devotion, a dangerously obsessed Angela lovingly declares him to be her one and only perfect prince. The narrative violently slams back to reality as a completely horrified Cecilia stands frozen in her bedchamber after overhearing the sickening truth. A suffocating wave of absolute dread crashes over the young bride as the terrifying reality of her inescapable, toxic marriage fully sinks in. Spinning sharply on her heels, a fiercely determined Cecilia urgently resolves to escape the hostile mansion as fast as humanly possible. Angela's violently unhinged promise to have the unborn child call her Mama Angela echoes relentlessly through the panicked bride's racing mind. Sickened to her absolute core, Cecilia desperately questions if her negligent husband truly plans to hand over her future baby as a living toy. Forcing her trembling hands to steady, the intelligent noblewoman rapidly begins calculating a brilliant strategy to secure her immediate freedom. A sharp, sudden gasp escapes her lips as the towering figure of the elderly butler James silently materializes right behind her. Mentally charting the perilous escape route, she estimates she can reach the safety of the Sutherland estate in exactly 4 grueling days. Masking her intense desperation with aristocratic grace, Cecilia calmly requests a carriage under the innocent guise of a simple town errand. Catching a fleeting glimmer of absolute panic in her eyes, the highly observant butler raises a deeply suspicious brow at her sudden request. Staring intensely at her remarkably pale complexion, James bluntly points out that the new lady of the house does not look well at all. Refusing to let her travel alone, the calculating butler firmly insists on deploying 2 heavily armed guards and the maid Anna as an inescapable escort. Maintaining her flawless composure, Cecilia weakly defends her request by claiming she is merely heading into town for some light shopping. When she attempts to gracefully decline the heavy security, James brutally shuts her down by declaring it the absolute, unbreakable custom of the Garland family. Trapped entirely by the estate's strict protocols, a deeply defeated Cecilia reluctantly yields and orders the suspicious butler to prepare the escort. Riding silently within the luxurious carriage, the anxious bride realizes with terrifying clarity that she is essentially a prisoner being watched by her own staff. The ornate, heavily guarded carriage violently rattles down the bustling cobblestone streets, carrying the desperate woman deeper into the crowded town. Stepping into a trusted, family-owned boutique, a highly frustrated Cecilia mentally curses her total inability to slip away from her suffocating minders. Suddenly, a familiar, highly commanding voice whispers her name from the dark shadows, instantly freezing the panicked bride in her tracks. Confirming his urgent presence, the hidden figure aggressively warns the startled noblewoman that there is absolutely no time to waste. Later that exact evening, a deeply nervous Cecilia carefully pours a massive, generous glass of wine for her completely oblivious husband. Launching her desperate, high-stakes operation to get him drunk, she brilliantly manipulates his massive ego by praising his legendary alcohol tolerance. Completely falling for her calculated flattery, a heavily blushing Ralph cheerfully gulps down the incredibly potent vintage estate wine. Seizing the highly vulnerable moment, a fiercely determined Cecilia locks her hardened gaze onto her rapidly intoxicating husband. The heavy, suffocating tension instantly returns as she steels her nerves to brutally confront him regarding his deeply sickening hidden promises. Staring him down without a single ounce of mercy, she bluntly demands to know if he truly promised to let Angela name their future child. A heavy, utterly agonizing silence violently descends upon the dimly lit room as Ralph slowly processes the massive weight of her accusation. Confirming her absolute worst fears, the incredibly drunk and careless lord shatters her reality by answering with a blunt, unapologetic yes. The horrifying, inescapable reality of his ultimate betrayal violently crushes the very last remnants of her fading marital hope. Attempting to appease her with an absolutely psychotic compromise, he foolishly promises that the child will at least call her Mama Cecilia as well. Completely disregarding her completely valid horror, the dangerously negligent husband casually orders her to stop overthinking such distant future matters. Raising his heavy glass for yet another oblivious sip, Ralph brutally dismisses her massive trauma by claiming there is no point in worrying about the future. Furiously rejecting the completely reasonable proposal, an indignant Ralph shouts a definitive refusal into the quiet room. Flustered by his sudden arrival, a startled maid bows deeply as Cecilia cautiously attempts to broach a new, pressing topic. Catching her completely off guard, Ralph interrupts her thoughts with a sudden, sharp call of her name. Firmly asserting her duties as a newlywed, Cecilia boldly suggests hosting a formal tea party to officially greet their noble neighbors. Eager to make a flawless impression, the young bride proudly reveals she brought plenty of exquisite tea to complement their finest wine. Instantly shutting down the social gathering, Ralph grumbles that the incredibly fragile Angela is terrible with guests and demands they cancel. Desperate to forge vital social connections, Cecilia argues that establishing powerful noble allies is crucial for their estate's future survival. Staring with unyielding determination, the young wife coldly questions why the sickly Angela even needs to participate in hosting the aristocratic guests. Mentally scoffing at the mansion's atrocious decor, she cynically realizes that welcoming high society guests into a brothel-like interior would only bring immense shame. Picturing the brutal noble gossip, she imagines the snobby guests laughing off her apparent absence as the pathetic shyness of a reclusive new bride. Refusing to be publicly humiliated as a cowardly recluse, a deeply frustrated Cecilia silently vows to fight against this absurd social isolation. Shifting the tense conversation toward the upcoming estate renovations, Ralph awkwardly recalls the impending plans for rose-pink curtains and baby-pink wallpaper. Utterly appalled by the childish design choice, an incredulous Cecilia freezes in absolute disbelief and sharply questions his statement. Chuckling nervously, a deeply oblivious Ralph awkwardly admits the aesthetic might lean slightly more toward gaudy than adorable. Blindly defending Angela's horribly immature taste, he foolishly argues that young ladies naturally adore overwhelmingly girlish, bright pink rooms. Maintaining her icy aristocratic composure, Cecilia brutally condemns the vibrant design as utterly tasteless and completely inappropriate for a respected noble household. Exploding in sudden, defensive rage, Ralph viciously scolds his wife for showing absolutely zero compassion toward Angela's supposedly heartfelt planning. Glaring down at his stunned bride, the volatile husband completely abandons all logic to fiercely protect his childhood friend's fragile feelings. Delivering a petty, vindictive punishment, a furious Ralph abruptly declares he will spend the entire night comforting the manipulative Angela instead. Releasing a massive sigh of absolute relief, Cecilia sinks into her chair and happily celebrates successfully dodging another terrifying night with him. Gripping her skirts with renewed, burning determination, the resilient bride fiercely vows to find a foolproof way to escape this suffocating house no matter what. Time violently skips forward to reveal a sickeningly smug Angela cheerfully seeking validation for her newly installed, aggressively pink interior. Clapping her hands in unhinged delight, the parasitic girl praises the blindingly bright pink wallpaper and matching curtains for making everything so dazzling. Mentally screaming as the hideous colors violently burn her eyes, an utterly defeated Cecilia internally begs them to just do whatever they want. Ignoring the atrocious decor entirely, the calculating bride uses Ralph's cowardly avoidance to carefully plot her ultimate escape strategy. The heavy wooden door suddenly clicks open as a highly observant servant silently enters the tense, brightly colored sitting room. Bringing fresh tea for the toxic duo, the loyal staff's presence sharply reminds Cecilia that any desperate letter sent home will be instantly intercepted and destroyed. Bowing apologetically for the interruption, the dutiful servant promises to immediately prepare another fresh pot for the demanding household. Stepping out into the grand hallway, the elderly butler James completely startles the young bride with his sudden, silent approach. Turning sharply to face the imposing head servant, a highly focused Cecilia mentally steels herself for another exhausting battle of wills. Politely inquiring about her needs, James watches intently as Cecilia boldly announces she has a very specific request for him instead. Raising a graceful hand to stop his immediate assistance, the confident lady firmly states that his standard services will not be necessary today. Dropping a highly influential merchant name, Cecilia expertly pivots the conversation toward the prestigious Berkeley Company. Delivering a direct, unbreakable command, she strictly orders the head butler to immediately contact the renowned dress atelier at the Berkeley Company. Feigning a deep, long-standing loyalty to the merchant house, Cecilia smoothly claims she wishes to commission a stunning new gown from her trusted tailor. Skillfully planting seeds of doubt, she casually mocks the Garland family's traditional designer Reynolds for producing terribly outdated, uninspired clothing. Pushback arrives instantly as a stern James firmly expects the new bride to strictly honor the Garland family's ancient tailoring traditions. Brilliantly twisting his aristocratic pride, Cecilia argues that wearing hopelessly outdated gowns to high society gatherings will only bring catastrophic humiliation upon their noble name. Delivering the ultimate, irresistible bait, she proudly reveals that this exact prestigious atelier currently designs exquisite gowns for Her Highness Princess Charlotte herself. Smirking with absolute, hidden triumph, the brilliant tactician watches her flawless trap snap shut as James swallows the royal bait hook, line and sinker. Eavesdropping from the doorway, a completely starstruck Angela gasps in sheer, unadulterated shock at the mention of the princess's legendary dresses. Turning to the parasitic girl with a sickeningly sweet smile, a highly manipulative Cecilia innocently suggests that Angela should also commission a few exquisite gowns. Mentally criticizing the pathetic girl's tragically outdated wardrobe, Cecilia accurately deduces her dresses are nothing more than altered hand-me-downs from her late mother. Driven entirely by blinding greed and envy, a thoroughly manipulated Angela instantly begs Ralph to buy her a gown from the exact same royal atelier. Weaponizing the fragile girl's massive ego, Cecilia warmly agrees that matching the princess's royal fashion would be an absolutely wonderful idea. Trapped entirely by his childhood friend's relentless demands, a deeply exhausted Ralph lets out a heavy, defeated sigh. Seizing the perfect opening, James politely questions why the young master insists on blindly clinging to outdated traditions when Lady Angela clearly desires the new gowns. Conceding total defeat under the crushing weight of their combined pressure, a worn-down Ralph reluctantly agrees that the head butler is right. Granting official permission for the expensive royal commission, the foolish lord unwittingly hands his brilliant wife the exact key she needs for her escape. A dazzling, starry background frames the monumental victory as Cecilia's masterful manipulation brilliantly secures her vital connection to the outside world. Connecting the pieces of her brilliant escape plan, a fiercely determined Cecilia mentally calculates her next crucial move within the toxic household. Stepping into the tense room with a heavy sigh, a completely oblivious Ralph carelessly apologizes for keeping his young bride waiting. Breaking the suffocating silence, the negligent husband softly calls out Cecilia's name to grab her undivided, immediate attention. Clenching her fists in secret desperation, the resilient bride fiercely vows to simply survive each agonizing night until her grand plan finally comes to fruition. Completely misunderstanding her brilliant manipulation, a foolish Ralph praises his remarkable wife for supposedly making amends by generously gifting Angela a beautiful gown. Pivoting her social strategy flawlessly, Cecilia smoothly manipulates the entire situation by firmly insisting that the fragile Angela should safely stay home this time. Falling right into the clever conversational trap, Ralph hesitates and foolishly suggests that his incredibly clingy childhood friend could simply accompany them out. Ignoring his deeply toxic suggestion entirely, the cunning bride enthusiastically pivots the topic toward an exclusive theatrical play she desperately wishes to see. Slamming the heavy bedroom door shut with intense relief, Cecilia coldly reassures herself that expertly manipulating his massive ego is the only way she will survive. Leaning exhaustedly against the cool wooden frame, the completely drained noblewoman allows a fleeting, rare moment of pure physical vulnerability to wash over her. Gazing down at her trembling right hand, she draws immense, comforting strength from the heavy, intricately engraved signet ring gifted by her fiercely protective brother Isaac. A sudden wave of deep familial guilt violently crashes over her as she painfully remembers the desperately unanswered letter sitting in her drawer from her worried sister Amelia. Struggling immensely under the crushing weight of her isolated marriage, a tearful Cecilia silently questions exactly how much longer she can perfectly maintain this aristocratic facade. Brushing away her hot tears with renewed, burning fire, she fiercely reminds herself that she is not truly alone and must focus entirely on returning home completely alive. Miles away in the bustling, brightly lit capital city, a deeply frustrated Isaac violently rubs his aching neck while drowning in a massive sea of bureaucratic paperwork. Groaning in absolute, unadulterated exasperation, the exhausted nobleman furiously slams his heavy pen down as yet another irritating regional dispute forcibly crosses his cluttered desk. Scanning the official, stamped document, Isaac aggressively complains about receiving countless, endless reports regarding Viscount Bernard's highly reckless and destructive land development. Poking his head into the chaotic, paper-filled office, a highly concerned colleague casually asks the stressed Isaac what their exact next administrative move should legally be. Questioning the basic financial logic of the entire endeavor, the colleague sharply points out that the targeted wilderness is completely uncultivable and the Viscount's family severely lacks the required wealth. Sighing heavily at the absolute political foolishness, Isaac angrily recalls how the highly stubborn Viscount completely ignored their previous settlement talks and violently refused to learn his lesson. A sudden, incredibly shocking revelation violently interrupts the mundane political discussion as the immensely powerful and wealthy Duke Leonard is abruptly mentioned as a backer. Confirming his anxious colleague's deep, swirling suspicions, a sharp-eyed Isaac reveals he personally investigated the bizarre funding and discovered the exact same troubling financial inconsistencies. Narrowing his intense eyes in deep, calculating suspicion, the fiercely protective brother openly questions exactly why a prestigious duke would suddenly involve himself in such a doomed, low-level venture. A visceral, highly uncontrollable wave of absolute disgust violently twists Isaac's face as dark, deeply unsettling memories of the manipulative duke violently claw their way to the surface. Attempting to rapidly rationalize the bizarre financial move, the colleague correctly points out that Duke Leonard constantly and greedily dips his hands into all sorts of highly suspicious ventures. Searching desperately for a hidden, logical motive, the anxious colleague asks if a secret blood tie exists between the nobles, which Isaac immediately and firmly denies. A chilling, horrifying realization violently strikes Isaac as he suddenly remembers Richard explicitly mentioning how incredibly forcefully the Sutherland Garland marriage was officially arranged by the Duke. Analyzing the Duke's deeply toxic, unyielding aristocratic pride, Isaac grimly notes that the powerful man absolutely despises losing face more than anything else in the entire kingdom. Snapping instantly into immediate hyperprotective action, a fierce Isaac strictly orders his loyal subordinate to report any new, suspicious developments to him at once. Absorbing the incredibly dangerous and shifting political landscape, the fiercely protective brother falls into a heavy, rapidly calculating silence as he brilliantly plans his next move. The deeply sinister Dutz, Isaac finally understands exactly why his powerful uncle was completely unable to violently push back harder against the Duke's forced marriage demands. Refusing to let the highly dark and dangerous matter slide, a fiercely determined Isaac firmly vows to keep his own watchful, unwavering eye directly on the volatile situation. Gazing intensely out the bright office window, the deeply devoted brother silently prays that his massive political anxieties are absolutely nothing but needless, empty worry for his beloved Cecilia. The intense narrative violently shifts back to the Garland estate, where a highly chaotic, vibrant dress fitting is currently underway in the grand, opulent sitting room. Basking greedily in the absolute undivided attention, a sickeningly smug Angela eagerly asks the flattering maids whether a bright pink or pure white fabric suits her fragile beauty better. Holding up a massive, incredibly lavish design sketch, the highly parasitic girl excitedly demands immediate validation for the stunning, overly expensive gown. Feeding her endless, gaping ego flawlessly, a highly manipulative maid cheerfully suggests she simply commissioned the exact same exquisite design in both incredibly expensive colors. Gloating with absolute deeply unhinged triumph, a highly delusional Angela loudly claims her lavish new wardrobe will instantly prove exactly who the true lady of the house really is. The deeply spoiled girl, like desperate sycophants, The treacherous estate maids aggressively compliment how the incredibly sweet pink perfectly highlights her delicate, charming beauty. Maintaining her flawless, icy aristocratic composure, a completely unbothered Cecilia elegantly yields the highly chaotic room to the pathetic, grasping girl. Absolutely to participate in the humiliating, loud circus, the dignified bride smoothly announces her firm intention to select her own exclusive gowns in the total privacy of her chambers. Stepping immediately and aggressively into her path, the highly stubborn maid Anna strictly refuses to leave Cecilia's side, fiercely citing her official assignment as a personal attendant. Locking highly intense eyes with the insolent servant, Cecilia's beautiful voice drops to a dangerously cold, authoritative register as she sharply calls out Anna's name. Delivering a flawless, deeply cutting dismissal, the true lady of the house firmly commands the highly annoying maid to stop worrying about her and go assist the pathetic Lady Angela instead. The highly arrogant maid of her false, borrowed authority, a fiercely confident Cecilia bluntly declares that she absolutely does not need any of Anna's terribly unrefined fashion advice. Desperately trying to maintain her crumbling control over the young bride, an incredibly flustered Anna attempts to fiercely argue that the strict head butler James explicitly instructed her to stay. The blatant, highly insulting surveillance completely, Cecilia coldly informs the panicking spy that she has personally ordered from the prestigious Berkeley company many times before. Turning her elegant back on the completely stunned and useless servant, the brilliantly calculating noblewoman successfully isolates herself to execute the next highly crucial phase of her plan. Meanwhile, back in the incredibly chaotic, loud sitting room, the highly oblivious Angela continues to completely make a massive, unrefined fool of herself in front of the royal tailors. Laughing cruelly and ignorantly at a vastly superior sketch, the deeply delusional girl highly mocks a classic design for supposedly resembling a terribly outdated style from over a century ago. Delighted by the brilliant idea, the tailor eagerly agrees to draft the stunning design immediately if shown the original painting. Hatching her clever ruse, Cecilia smoothly mentions recalling a specific, elegant portrait style hanging somewhere within the grand estate. Pivoting her gaze, the calculating bride sharply orders her assigned maid to go fetch that exact portrait. Commanding absolute attention, Cecilia coldly calls out Anna's name to force the stubborn servant into motion. Feigning aristocratic forgetfulness, the brilliant tactician casually suggests the painting might be located somewhere near the distant music room. Startled by the direct command, a highly confused Anna points to herself while Cecilia bluntly demands who else she could possibly be addressing. Stammering defensively, Anna foolishly attempts to invoke James's strict orders to never leave the new bride's side. Shattering the maid's borrowed authority, Cecilia furiously demands to know exactly when Anna stopped serving her to become James's personal spy. Desperately clinging to her oppressive instructions, the sweating servant stubbornly insists she simply cannot leave her assigned post. Dropping her voice to a terrifying, icy register, the true lady of the house forces Anna to explicitly acknowledge exactly who holds the highest authority. A suffocating, highly dangerous tension violently fills the room as Cecilia fixes the trembling maid with an unyielding, predatory glare. Exploding with fierce, undeniable aristocratic dominance, Cecilia barks a final, blistering command to find the portrait immediately. Blinking in total bewilderment as the terrified spy flees, the royal tailors anxiously ask the young bride exactly what is going on. Instantly dropping her cold facade, a profoundly desperate Cecilia turns back to the startled merchants with absolute urgency. Lowering her proud head in a shocking display of total vulnerability, the noblewoman silently pleads for their utmost discretion. Shattering the illusion of her wealthy lifestyle, she urgently confesses that she absolutely did not summon them here merely for luxury gowns. Clasping her hands together in sheer desperation, Cecilia fiercely begs the astonished tailors to help her escape this toxic nightmare. Horrified by her crushing isolation, the deeply sympathetic merchants gasp at the terrible cruelty inflicted upon the young bride. Weeping tears of profound gratitude, Cecilia heavily thanks her sudden saviors as they quickly begin brainstorming a stealthy extraction method. Rapidly discarding chaotic ideas like mannequins or tied bedsheets, the frantic group realizes they need a much more secure, foolproof plan. Burning with righteous determination, the loyal tailors fiercely vow to personally smuggle the desperate woman to absolute safety. Gesturing to their massive, sturdy equipment, the brilliant merchants suggest hiding the petite bride completely inside their heavy fabric trunk. Brushing off her frantic worries about the crushing weight, the strong tailors cheerfully assure her it will not be a problem at all. Steeling her nerves for the perilous journey ahead, a fiercely resolute Cecilia silently curls up inside the dark, claustrophobic luggage. Snapping the heavy trunk shut, the disguised saviors carefully hoist their precious, hidden cargo into the air. Walking with practiced, unremarkable efficiency, the tailors expertly carry the massive crate right past the completely oblivious estate staff. Heavy, rhythmic footsteps violently echo down the grand hallway as the daring, high-stakes escape operation enters its most critical phase. Peeking out from the lavish sitting room, a highly spoiled Angela suddenly notices the bustling tailors heading toward the grand exit. Pouting with excessive, childish greed, the parasitic girl loudly questions if the high-end merchants are truly leaving already. Sighing dramatically, Angela selfishly claims she hasn't picked enough dresses yet but smugly decides her massive haul will do for now. Humming a highly deceptive, polite agreement, the sweating tailors successfully mask their rising panic and swiftly load the heavy trunk. The ornate merchant carriage violently clatters down the cobblestone path, successfully carrying the hidden bride far away from her marital prison. Watching the carriage disappear into the distance, a deeply smug Angela smirks with absolute, unadulterated triumph. Basking in her massive financial victory, the delusional girl gleefully recalls the royal tailors confirming her staggering order of 15 lavish outfits. Throwing her arms up in total ecstasy, Angela loudly screams that this absolute, bottomless luxury is the exact life she always deserved. Twirling wildly through the extravagant room, the deeply toxic parasite violently celebrates her complete financial domination over the Garland estate. Releasing a heavy sigh, she hypocritically blames her uncle's terrible business sense for forcing her through so many agonizing past hardships. A dark, incredibly bitter flashback violently rips her back to childhood, revealing the crushing reality that she lacked any resemblance to her aristocratic father. Haunted by dark whispers, she painfully remembers the vicious rumors swirling around her completely free-spirited, scandalous mother. Standing completely alone in a massive, cold room, a tiny, deeply isolated Angela stares blankly at the unforgiving world. Shattered by her mother's sudden death, the tragic orphan brutally recalls being entirely shunned and discarded by her own bloodline. Piercing through her crushing, absolute despair, a bright, cheerful young boy suddenly steps forward to gently ask the crying girl's name. Flashing a brilliantly warm, innocent smile, a young Ralph officially introduces himself and completely shatters her lonely darkness. Gazing up at her newfound savior with wide, tear-filled eyes, the fragile girl hesitantly returns his incredibly warm greeting. Twisting her childhood trauma into dark obsession, Angela silently confesses that Ralph was the very first sparkling, valuable thing she ever managed to obtain. Stepping fiercely between her and a cruel bully named Felicia, the incredibly valiant Ralph boldly declares it wrong to mock the sickly. Basking in his absolute, unwavering protection, the twisted girl revels in the wonderfully intoxicating feeling of completely owning her very own prince. Reaching out his strong, dependable hand, the fiercely loyal boy gently promises to lead the highly dependent Angela safely back home. Snapping back to the present, a deeply manipulative Angela tightly grips Ralph's arm to maintain her eternal, toxic hold over him. Feigning extreme exhaustion to weaponize his endless guilt, the parasitic girl leans heavily on the foolish lord as he anxiously asks if she is okay. Sprinting through the dense wilderness, a young Angela desperately shouts for Ralph to wait as she struggles to keep up. Climbing weakly into her bed, the fragile girl claims she simply needs to rest for a little while to regain her fleeting strength. Staring down with deep concern, a worried young Ralph softly calls out her name as he watches her suffer. Trembling beneath her heavy covers, the terrified orphan tearfully confesses that she might die young just like her illness-stricken parents. A heartbreaking wave of absolute despair washes over the tiny girl as tears stream relentlessly down her pale cheeks. Stepping fiercely to her bedside, the fiercely loyal boy firmly vows to stay with her forever and protect her from all harm. Gazing up at her newfound savior with wide, tear-filled eyes, the deeply moved Angela silently absorbs his unbreakable childhood promise. Gently holding her small hand, Ralph promises to remain right by her side until she safely falls asleep. Shifting to the present, an adult Angela coldly stares at a stack of documents as a voice suggests she is of age and should consider marriage proposals. Faking a pathetic display of hesitation, the highly manipulative parasite trails off while internally plotting her next move. Feigning absolute shock, Angela dramatically questions if these official marriage proposals are truly meant for her. Tossing the papers aside in utter disgust, She bitterly complains that these worthless merchants and grandfathers only want her noble connections. Calculating her bleak financial future, the greedy girl realizes that marrying the impoverished Ralph would only lead them straight into absolute ruin. A dark, incredibly sinister expression twists across her face as she heavily weighs her incredibly selfish options. Rationalizing her toxic dependency, Angela selfishly decides that keeping Ralph as her eternal servant remains her absolute best option. Clinging to her delusional fantasy, she fiercely demands that Ralph must continue sparkling forever so she can eternally remain a pampered princess. Scoffing at the mere thought of actual labor, the deeply lazy girl firmly rejects the idea of marrying Ralph if it means sacrificing her luxurious lifestyle. A sudden flashback violently rips her back to the horrifying moment she first laid eyes on her ultimate rival. Standing with flawless aristocratic grace, a stunningly beautiful Cecilia politely introduces herself as the wealthy Sutherland heiress. Seething with instant, overwhelming jealousy, Angela glares at the highly intelligent woman who effortlessly possesses everything she lacks. Boiling with toxic entitlement, the deeply insecure girl furiously assumes the wealthy bride plans to steal away everything rightfully hers. A vicious, highly vindictive scowl completely overtakes Angela's face as she silently vows to destroy Cecilia's happiness. Brushing off her own cruelty as a mere prank, the wicked girl admits she hates children but heavily enjoyed tormenting the new bride regarding the naming rights. Smirking with absolute, unadulterated triumph, Angela gleefully recalls the absolute masterpiece of horror completely shattering Cecilia's flawless face. Yielding to her bottomless greed, the parasitic girl coldly rationalizes that she deserves absolute luxury since Cecilia will eventually inherit everything anyway. Deep in toxic thought, the highly manipulative interloper begins rapidly formulating a brilliant, entirely self-serving new strategy. Staring blankly ahead, the highly delusional girl wonders aloud if she could somehow secure an exceptionally handsome and unimaginably wealthy husband. Hatching a brilliant parasitic scheme, Angela excitedly realizes she can ruthlessly force Cecilia to provide a massive dowry and a perfect suitor. Banking entirely on her rival's immense wealth, she wildly assumes Cecilia will eagerly arrange her entire lavish future just to get rid of her. Clapping her hands in unhinged delight, the wicked girl officially dubs her brilliant extortion plan the ultimate husband-finding operation. A deeply sinister, highly unsettling smile brightly illuminates her face as she fully commits to bleeding the Sutherland heiress completely dry. Scanning her memories for wealthy targets, the opportunistic girl suddenly remembers how incredibly handsome Cecilia's cousin Isaac appeared at the disastrous wedding. The narrative violently snaps back to the tense present as a highly suspicious Angela rudely interrupts the fleeing tailors to ask if they are leaving already. Freezing in sheer panic, the heavily burdened merchants let out a startled gasp as the toxic girl blocks their path. Narrowing her deeply judgmental eyes, Angela fiercely scrutinizes the massive trunk carrying the hidden bride. Masking their intense terror with professional politeness, the tailors smoothly claim they are simply leaving because Lady Cecilia has officially finished her selections. Showering the highly egotistical girl with fake praise, the desperate merchants heavily thank Lady Angela for placing such a staggeringly large order. Swallowing the bait perfectly, a deeply smug Angela brutally mocks Cecilia's supposedly tiny order while proudly boasting about her own 15 lavish outfits. Gloating with absolute aristocratic dominance, the demanding girl arrogantly warns the bowing tailors that their future patronage completely depends on their speedy work. Yielding to her massive ego, the highly relieved merchants quickly bow and swiftly continue dragging their precious cargo toward the exit. Marching down the grand hallway, the disguised saviors carefully hoist the heavy trunk containing the desperate runaway bride. Exhaling a massive sigh of absolute relief, the sweating tailors quietly mutter about how incredibly nerve-wracking that intense encounter truly was. A sudden, highly authoritative voice violently shatters the tense silence as Lord Ralph steps out of the shadows to directly address the Berkeley merchants. Dropping their massive burden in pure shock, the highly panicked tailors freeze instantly as the clueless husband completely blocks their final escape route. Recovering their composure with practiced speed, the highly terrified merchants bow deeply to the imposing lord of the massive estate. Completely oblivious to the hidden heist, a heavily smiling Ralph politely commands the renowned tailors to craft exceptionally lovely dresses for his household women. Bragging about his wife's excellent connections, the foolish lord happily mentions hearing straight from Cecilia how incredibly popular the Berkeley atelier has become. Eager to escape his overwhelming presence, the deeply stressed tailors firmly promise to pour their absolute heart and soul into the expensive commission. The ornate merchant carriage finally bursts through the grand estate gates, violently rattling down the cobblestone road toward absolute freedom. Huddled tightly in the pitch-black trunk, a fiercely determined Cecilia's heart violently pounds as she hears the heavy, creaking sound of the front door finally sealing her escape. Confronting the fleeing merchants, a highly suspicious James demands to know exactly what happened to Lady Cecilia. Masking his rising panic, a quick-witted tailor smoothly deflects the question by suggesting the young bride is likely with her maid Anna. Selling the clever lie flawlessly, the merchant casually claims an exhausted Cecilia simply retreated to her chambers to rest after her extensive dress shopping. Narrowing his sharp eyes with predatory intuition, the imposing head butler slowly processes the highly convenient excuse as tension thickens. Locking his chilling gaze onto the nervous tailors, James bluntly asks for official permission to inspect the contents of their massive wooden trunk. Sweating bullets under his intense scrutiny, the merchant nervously stammers that the heavy crate merely contains sample fabrics intended for the Garland family. Refusing to back down, the relentless butler repeats his terrifying request to look inside the suspicious luggage. Taking a highly intimidating step forward, James menacingly asks if opening the sealed box would cause them some sudden, unexpected inconvenience. Justifying his blatant overreach, the calculating servant smoothly explains that he simply wishes to inspect the goods since he missed the actual selection process. Feigning innocent curiosity, James falsely claims he merely wanted to see exactly what kind of fashionable fabrics the royal atelier had brought. A suffocating, agonizing silence violently grips the grand hallway as the terrified merchants desperately exchange frantic, panicked glances. Forcing a painfully bright smile, the desperate tailors wave their trembling hands and rapidly insist there is absolutely no inconvenience at all. Reaching for the heavy metal latches, the sweating merchants slowly crack open the massive wooden trunk under the butler's piercing gaze. Vibrant, tightly packed layers of luxurious fabric completely fill the immediate view as the heavy lid is fully lifted. Gesturing toward the colorful silks with forced enthusiasm, the lead merchant nervously invites the towering butler to take a closer look. Leaning deeply over the open crate, James intensely scrutinizes the folded materials with his sharp, highly suspicious eyes. Stepping back with a polite bow, James smoothly thanks the highly relieved merchants for graciously accommodating his undeniably unreasonable request. Slamming the heavy lid shut, the frantic tailors secure the metal latches with lightning speed before their brilliant ruse can be exposed. Utterly convinced by the flawless deception, the head butler gracefully concedes that the royal fabrics are indeed truly beautiful. Huddled in the pitch-black darkness, a fiercely relieved Cecilia realizes that even the meticulous James could not rummage deeply through the packed crate. Clutching her chest in the claustrophobic space, the breathless bride mentally praises her brilliant strategy of completely burying herself beneath the heavy fabric layers. Marveling at her savior's ironclad composure, Cecilia listens to her violently pounding heart as the merchants flawlessly execute her daring escape. The ornate merchant carriage violently clatters away from the towering estate, successfully smuggling the young noblewoman toward ultimate freedom. Emerging from her cramped hiding spot, an immensely grateful Cecilia assures her saviors that she explicitly left a letter claiming full responsibility to protect their business. Bowing her head in deep remorse, the runaway bride sincerely apologizes for dragging the innocent tailors into such an incredibly dangerous situation. Brushing off her profound guilt, a loyal merchant fiercely declares that their company president would gladly risk his own life to ensure her absolute safety. Revealing a deep, long-standing debt to Cecilia's honorable father, the tailors kindly urge the weeping bride to completely banish her lingering worries. Gazing out the rattling carriage window, a stunned Cecilia marvels at how incredibly easily she just escaped that suffocating, prison-like mansion. Hot tears of overwhelming relief violently stream down her pale cheeks as she painfully wonders when she last experienced such genuine, selfless kindness. The heavy wooden wheels violently churn the dusty road as the carriage speeds further away from the toxic Garland territory. Rattling steadily through the serene countryside, the rescue team puts crucial, life-saving distance between the bride and her negligent husband. Leaning forward with sudden, burning determination, Cecilia urgently calls out to grab the focused merchant's immediate attention. Misunderstanding her intense urgency, a concerned tailor politely asks if the exhausted young lady wishes to stop and take a brief rest. Ignoring the offer, a highly calculating Cecilia strictly asks exactly how much time remains until they reach the nearest bustling post town. Upon learning it is merely 2 hours away, the fearless bride boldly declares her absolute intention to disembark there and travel to the royal capital entirely alone. A chorus of absolute shock violently erupts from the bewildered merchants as they process her incredibly reckless, solitary travel plan. Fiercely rejecting her dangerous proposal, the fiercely loyal tailors loudly vow that they will never leave her side until she is safely delivered. Shaking their heads in frantic unison, the protective merchants absolutely refuse to let the vulnerable noblewoman journey through the treacherous roads unaccompanied. Pleading with cold, unyielding logic, Cecilia brilliantly argues that the hostile Garland household will undoubtedly notice her sudden disappearance at any moment. Stubbornly clinging to their honorable duty, the brave tailors loudly swear to stay right by her side until the very bitter end. Brandishing a pair of massive tailoring scissors, a highly dramatic merchant fiercely promises to protect her with his absolute life if danger strikes. Deeply touched but fiercely pragmatic, Cecilia gracefully rejects their noble sacrifice and firmly commands them to act as vital, distracting decoys instead. Questioning the massive gaps in her solitary plan, a highly anxious merchant asks exactly what she intends to do once she finally reaches the royal capital. Worrying deeply for her immediate safety, the tailors point out that she will be completely vulnerable while they attempt to securely contact her powerful family. Holding her ground with unshakable resolve, the brilliant tactician insists their overall chances of surviving the impending pursuit drastically increase if they split up. A heavy, reluctant silence falls over the rocking carriage as the merchants slowly realize the undeniable, brilliant logic of her dangerous strategy. Releasing a collective, defeated sigh, the fiercely loyal tailors finally bow their heads and respectfully accept her absolute, daring command. Flashing a brilliantly confident smile, Cecilia completely reassures her anxious saviors by revealing she has a highly reliable ally waiting for her. Yielding to her flawless plan, the merchants agree to part ways but strictly demand she accept at least one highly capable bodyguard for the journey. Swearing to assign their absolutely most skilled protector, the tailors solidify the final phase of Cecilia's epic escape toward the royal capital. Assuring the runaway bride of their total support, the loyal merchants arrange for her to meet their trusted guard at the nearest post town. A wave of profound dismay crashes over Cecilia as she discovers a glaring, logistical nightmare hindering her urgent escape. Desperate to maintain her momentum, the noblewoman frantically searches for any available transportation toward the capital. The horrifying reality hits her that no high-end carriages suitable for a noble lady are currently available. Pushing aside her intense anxiety, she stares into the unknown, bracing herself for the long, arduous journey that lies ahead. The bustling merchant team confirms that several private carriages will finally return to the post town by tomorrow. Urged to remain patient, a stressed Cecilia struggles to contain her mounting panic as the hours slowly tick away. Every passing moment feels like an eternity while she waits, knowing her absence will soon be discovered. Her heart hammers against her ribs as she realizes just how precarious her newfound freedom truly is. Hope dangles by a thread when the merchants reveal that a single, lone seat has suddenly become available. Upon learning it is a shared carriage meant for commoners, Cecilia desperately demands they find a way to secure her passage. Steeling her resolve, she commands the merchants to reserve the final seat for her immediately. To complete her daring transformation, she orders them to purchase sturdy servants' clothes and a hat from the local innkeeper. Strategically navigating her desperate situation, she asks the merchants to secure a bag and charcoal to further disguise her elegant appearance. With the departure time looming just an hour away, the group frantically scrambles to finalize the logistics of her departure. Cecilia hands over a substantial sum of hush money to the merchants, ensuring their continued, absolute silence. Checking every detail of her disguise, she meticulously prepares to vanish completely from the Garland family's reach. A grim determination settles over her features, knowing that this dangerous gamble is her only remaining path to survival. She reflects on the terrifying stakes, fully aware that she cannot afford a single mistake on this long road to safety. The journey ahead looks incredibly tough, but the noblewoman refuses to let fear paralyze her decision-making. The shared carriage is packed with physically imposing rough-around-the-edges men, making Cecilia's disguise more vital than ever. This grueling, non-stop journey promises to deliver her to the gates of the royal capital in exactly 3 days. Every mile traveled brings her closer to the safety she craves and further from the toxic prison she left behind. Enduring the cramped, exhausting conditions for 72 hours seems like an impossible, agonizing feat. Clutching a small token close to her heart, she silently pleads for the strength to survive until she reaches the capital. Her mind drifts to her brother Isaac, recalling how he was the only one who consistently reached out to help her. Memories of her childhood flood back, highlighting the stark contrast between Isaac's care and her own lonely upbringing. She vividly recalls the traumatic day her brother Richard heartlessly abandoned her alone in the dark, dangerous forest. Bitter regret stings as she wonders where things went wrong, leading to their eventual, painful estrangement. She revisits the time she suffered alone, from spraining her foot to being hunted by wild, ferocious dogs. Sadness permeates her thoughts as she ponders whether she unintentionally drove Isaac to distance himself from her. The haunting question of her brother's growing coldness continues to plague her throughout the lonely night. Suddenly, a rough, unsavory man sitting nearby interrupts her dark, introspective spiral. He bluntly engages her in conversation, oblivious to her true identity or her incredibly high-stakes predicament. Cecilia struggles to respond, her entire focus locked on maintaining her commoner disguise without faltering. The man teases her about her silent demeanor, asking if she lost her job or if she is simply traveling to the capital. His irritating, monotonous chatter drags on, making her long for the solitude of her own thoughts. Growing impatient with her lack of response, he mockingly calls her boring before turning away. She forces herself to breathe, reminding herself that surviving this interaction is just another step toward her ultimate goal. Her focus shifts entirely to the strategic moves she must make once she successfully arrives at the royal capital. With every passing mile, the crushing weight of her past begins to lift, replaced by a desperate, electric hope. She keeps her head low and her eyes averted, playing the part of a quiet, unassuming traveler to perfection. Miraculously, the weather remains fair throughout their trek, allowing the carriage to maintain a surprisingly rapid pace. As the third day dawns, the exhaustion of the grueling, non-stop journey finally begins to take its physical toll. The end of their transit looms, signaling the approach of a new, incredibly dangerous chapter in her life. Her nerves flare as the familiar sights of the surrounding landscape give way to the bustling energy of the capital. The massive gates of the royal capital finally loom ahead, a beacon of safety in her long, nightmarish escape. Armed with her resolve, she prepares to make her final push toward the sanctuary she has fought so hard to reach. Her immediate plan is to contact Isaac, but a sudden, nagging doubt stops her in her tracks. The realization that her plan might be flawed forces her to reevaluate everything as she stands at the city's threshold. Utterly exhausted from her grueling journey, a weary young traveler finally collapses into her bed with profound relief, desperately crying out that she can finally sleep. Drifting into an uneasy and restless slumber, the fatigued girl sluggishly begins to wonder what her next crucial move should be. Strolling cautiously through a bustling market alleyway, the disguised young woman, clad in a humble newsboy cap and vest, calmly observes her vibrant surroundings. Pacing steadily across the intricate cobblestone streets, she navigates the unfamiliar city in her highly understated, boyish attire. Looming grandly against the bright sky, a magnificent and highly detailed royal palace dominates the impressive urban skyline with its towering architectural spires. Glancing nervously at her ragged clothes, the anxious traveler seriously doubts if anyone of authority will actually listen to her while dressed in such a lowly manner. Standing completely alone on the patterned pavement, she logically reasons that the important person she seeks definitely works inside the grand royal palace. Trudging wearily down a narrow, sunlit street, the exhausted girl heavily murmurs to herself about how overwhelmingly sleepy she feels. Suddenly, a large, menacing hand swiftly reaches out from the ominous shadows to snatch her with aggressive unpredictability. Reconsidering her precarious situation, she sharply deduces that seeking out the prestigious Night Order might actually be far more reliable for her desperate mission. Without any warning, an aggressive voice violently shouts for the kid, as a heavy hand firmly clamps down upon her fragile shoulder. Looming aggressively over her terrified form, a rugged, heavily bearded man glares downward with an intense and profoundly intimidating, predatory demeanor. Tightening his forceful grip upon her trembling shoulder, the imposing stranger sneers menacingly about what an absolute coincidence it is to run into her. Startled and visibly sweating under his intense gaze, the anxious girl stammers nervously as the towering man questions if she has business in this dangerous area too. Leaning in uncomfortably close to scrutinize her delicate features, The bearded creep sharply identifies that her disguise is a sham and that she is actually a woman. Smirking with deeply malicious intent, the uninvited stranger condescendingly offers to help her out of whatever perilous trouble she currently faces. Cornering his vulnerable prey, the harasser boldly notes what a remarkable beauty she is, pointing out that a woman traveling completely alone on a carriage is really something dangerously notable. Summoning a fierce burst of sudden adrenaline, the fiercely determined girl aggressively and violently shoves the towering man's heavy arm entirely away from her body. Burning with intense righteous fury, her wide eye fiercely glares back at her towering attacker with an unwavering and explosive defensive determination. Caught entirely off guard by her sudden physical retaliation, the shocked bearded man stumbles backward with a loud, pained grunt. Cursing him fiercely as a miserable bastard, the terrified but fiercely resilient girl desperately sprints away from her staggered attacker as fast as her legs can carry her. Racing frantically through the confusing streets, she desperately hopes that she can just successfully reach the protective haven of the Night Order Station. Darting wildly through the endless winding corridors of the city, her panic intensifies as she frantically wonders where exactly the safe haven is geographically located. Suddenly losing all her remaining forward momentum, the physically shattered girl helplessly collapses hard onto her knees upon the unforgiving ground. Kneeling weakly on the harsh pavement with no energy left to run, she weakly admits that her desperately failing body is simply no good anymore. Trapped and exhausted, she realizes she has been violently bouncing in a carriage all this time, making her entirely vulnerable as the threatening man slowly stalks up right behind her. Paralyzed by utter physical exhaustion, she painfully recognizes that her violently shaking legs and aching back have finally completely reached their absolute functional limit. Stepping forcefully onto the cracked cobblestone right behind her collapsed form, a highly polished boot ominously signals the sudden arrival of yet another imposing figure. Just as all hope fades into darkness, a sharply dressed, authoritative official heroically intervenes by loudly shouting at the predatory bearded man to halt. Desperately backpedaling from the imposing royal official, the cowardly attacker wildly fabricates a lie, falsely claiming he was merely just trying to gently help someone who had suddenly collapsed. Narrowing his sharp, incredibly intimidating eyes in utter disbelief, the stern official coldly and sarcastically questions the harasser's blatantly obvious and pathetic lie. Projecting absolute and unyielding authority, the furious official violently demands to know exactly what the wretched man is doing to that innocent child. Thoroughly terrified by the official's intense wrath, the cowardly bearded attacker immediately abandons his prey and frantically runs away into the sprawling city. Peering weakly up at her sudden savior with fading vision, the exhausted girl faintly recognizes him and weakly calls out to "Brother Isaac" in sheer disbelief. Sighing with profound exasperation over the city's rampant crime, Isaac grimly notes that they should truly increase the Night Order's budget since this assault happened astonishingly near the royal palace. Turning his full compassionate attention strictly toward the completely collapsed girl, he observes she was obviously being chased and sincerely asks if she is all right. Suddenly recognizing her familiar hidden features beneath the dusty cap, the absolutely shocked official frantically asks why she is dressed like that and if she is genuinely Cecilia. Widening his intense eye in sheer absolute shock, the astonished knight's mind aggressively races as he processes the incredible revelation of her true identity. Calling out her true name with profound, overwhelming disbelief, the bewildered Isaac frantically confirms that the battered girl at his feet is undeniably Cecilia. Screaming her name in utter panic as her strength fully evaporates, the terrified Isaac watches helplessly as Cecilia finally loses consciousness and fully faints. Succumbing entirely to her immense absolute exhaustion, Cecilia's heavy eyelids finally flutter completely shut as the world around her fades to absolute black. Slowly awakening in a soft hospital bed with magical geometric healing shapes floating nearby, a highly disoriented Cecilia softly asks where exactly she is. Blinking against the bright harsh light of the unfamiliar room, her groggy pupil slowly widens as she desperately tries to fully process her entirely new surroundings. A gentle, deeply concerned voice warmly reaches out to the recovering girl, softly inquiring about exactly how she is currently feeling after her terrifying ordeal. Excitedly noticing her returning consciousness, someone brightly exclaims with immense relief that she is finally fully awake and safely out of harm's way. Providing deeply necessary context to ease her frantic mind, a reassuring voice firmly explains that she is currently safely resting within the infirmary at the knight's barracks. Still incredibly dizzy and deeply confused by the rapid turn of events, the stunned Cecilia softly questions if she is truly safely inside the highly protected knight's domain. While a deeply concerned medic urgently asks if she is physically hurt anywhere, Cecilia bravely reassures them that she is all right while weakly questioning her exact location. A deeply relieved caretaker explains that she was incredibly worried something terrible had happened because Isaac came rushing in looking so incredibly pale and terrified. A bespectacled medical official warmly smiles, assuring the extremely apologetic Cecilia that treating her was a rare sight to behold and that he is simply immensely glad it is nothing serious. Rushing toward the room, an eager voice excitedly questions if they just heard Cecilia speaking. Quickly approaching the door, someone announces that the adjutant is waiting outside and offers to fetch him immediately. Stepping into the room with profound relief, an older figure warmly expresses absolute gratitude that the young woman is finally awake. Startled by the sudden commotion, a wide-eyed Cecilia turns her gaze toward the doorway and softly calls out to Brother Isaac. Smiling with intense, overwhelming relief, the sharply dressed Isaac repeats his gratitude that she has finally regained consciousness. Trembling with lingering terror, Cecilia tearfully apologizes for causing him so much worry while admitting just how deeply frightened she was. Gazing back at her trembling form, Isaac's intense eye narrows with a mixture of deep concern and quiet, calculating fury. Leaning firmly against the window frame, his dark glove gripping the ledge, the stern knight prompts her to continue her harrowing tale. Frantically trying to reassure him, Cecilia insists she is perfectly fine now, sheepishly confessing that her collapse was merely due to severe sleep deprivation. Smiling with a forced, terrifyingly calm demeanor, the fiercely protective official politely asks her to explain exactly what happened. Keeping his terrifyingly pleasant smile fixed, he demands to know why she ended up being chased by violent ruffians in the slums. Shrinking back from his intensely intimidating aura, the nervous girl stammers quietly as she realizes just how fiercely angry her savior truly is. Pinching the bridge of his nose with a dark-gloved hand, Isaac forcefully exhales a heavy sigh of absolute exasperation. Regaining his rigid composure, the serious knight states with unwavering sincerity that he is profoundly thankful she is alive and safe. Simmering with cold fury, Isaac declares his absolute refusal to forgive her husband, admitting he always disliked the man but never imagined him to be such a scumbag. Hanging her head in deep shame, the heartbroken Cecilia closes her eyes tightly as the weight of her disastrous marriage crushes her spirit. Offering steadfast comfort, Isaac firmly reassures her that the blame lies solely with the scoundrels who violently exploited her natural desire to trust her new family. Clutching her chest with painful regret, the devastated girl softly admits that her blind faith was incredibly foolish. Recalling the horrific betrayal, her eye flashes with a sudden, intense realization of her husband's truly despicable nature. Boiling over with righteous indignation, the comically enraged Cecilia bluntly declares her husband to be a genuinely atrocious villain. Fuming with absolute disbelief, she angrily recounts how he deceitfully hid the existence of Angela until the very day they were wed. Pausing her rant, she notes with sheer bewilderment that Lord Ralph genuinely seemed to believe the two women would somehow get along perfectly. Musing with a sharp glint in her eye, she questions if Ralph is even smart enough to plot such deception, quickly brushing off Isaac's confused reaction. Staring intensely into the distance, the sharp-minded knight coldly agrees that the entire bizarre situation simply does not add up. Sitting rigidly with crossed legs, Isaac quickly clarifies that he is absolutely not trying to defend the treacherous husband. Shifting the mood entirely, he gently expresses his profound joy that she actively sought him out during her most desperate moment of need. Bowing her head apologetically, the guilt-ridden Cecilia sincerely apologizes for dragging him into her chaotic mess. Startled by his sudden, intense gaze, her wide, sparkling eye vividly reflects a sudden rush of overwhelming emotion. Looking up at him with a breathtaking, radiant smile, the resilient girl lets her absolute genuine relief shine through her battered exterior. Captivated by her sudden brilliant smile, the deeply moved Isaac softly murmurs her name with unmistakable affection. Snapping out of his sudden trance, the flustered knight's sharp eye widens as he aggressively catches himself slipping. Mentally scolding himself while a confused Cecilia watches, Isaac frantically reminds himself that he must strictly wait for her divorce to be finalized. Tilting her head in utter confusion, the innocent girl questions his sudden, bizarre internal panic. Quickly regaining his formidable composure, he intensely verifies her absolute intention to sever ties with Ralph Garland. Smiling smoothly to mask his previous embarrassment, he formally requests her absolute confirmation regarding her legal intentions. Closing her eyes with serene, unbreakable determination, Cecilia firmly anchors her resolve to finally end her miserable marriage. Smiling with cold, ruthless satisfaction, the powerful official states his complete and absolute agreement with her decision. Staring ahead with unwavering focus, she vehemently declares her urgent, burning desire to immediately sever all ties with the Garland family. Nodding firmly in absolute solidarity, Isaac fully accepts her bold, life-altering declaration. Delivering a harsh dose of reality, the knight gravely explains that noble divorces require far more than just personal desire to execute. Blinking in stunned, comical surprise, the naive girl clearly realizes she had no idea how complex the legal system actually is. Smirking with sharp, calculated intent, Isaac smoothly reveals that he has already prepared the perfect ally for her legal battle. Transitioning flawlessly into a formal introduction, the dashing knight confidently gestures toward his highly esteemed, smartly dressed companion. As a new dawn breaks over the sprawling royal city, the intricate wheels of justice aggressively begin to turn. Introducing the sharply dressed Gilbert O'Brien, Isaac proudly presents his childhood friend and exceptionally skilled lawyer to the hopeful Cecilia. Cutting straight to the dramatic chase, Isaac formally declares Cecilia's absolute intent to divorce the treacherous Mr. Garland. Leaning in with urgent purpose, the stern official explicitly demands Gilbert's immediate, expert legal counsel regarding the complex separation. Sweating profusely in utter panic, the terrified lawyer wildly misinterprets the situation, desperately begging Isaac to deny causing the marital scandal. Finally understanding the true, harrowing circumstances, the sharply focused Gilbert adjusts his glasses and calmly processes the facts. Getting straight to professional business, the expert lawyer grimly confirms that securing a noble divorce absolutely requires explicit, hard-fought permission from the royal court. Setting the strict legal stage, the sharp-minded lawyer Gilbert formally establishes the complex premise of a noble separation. Nodding in solemn agreement, Cecilia sadly predicts that her treacherous husband will undoubtedly file a fierce formal objection. Analyzing the dire financial situation, Gilbert sharply deduces that Ralph will fight viciously to keep her because the Garland family absolutely relies on Sutherland wealth to survive. Outlining the bureaucratic battlefield, the lawyer explains that once the court inevitably sends the decree to the Garlands, any objection will instantly halt the finalization. Questioning the viability of their impending legal war, Cecilia anxiously asks if her harrowing ordeal provides them with a strong enough case to win. Listing her horrific grievances with clinical precision, Gilbert confidently cites the unconsummated marriage and her relentless, cruel ostracism as devastating ammunition. Overwhelmed by the dark memories of her mistreatment, the battered girl solemnly lowers her weary gaze in heavy silence. Bracing for the inevitable storm, Gilbert firmly warns her that they must prepare thoroughly for a truly vicious legal battle ahead. Trembling with lingering self-doubt, Cecilia desperately wonders if the court will actually believe her lonely testimony against the powerful Garland family. Shattering her anxious fears, the fiercely protective Isaac vows with absolute certainty that he will stand by her side no matter what. Sparkling with renewed hope and tearful gratitude, the deeply moved Cecilia passionately agrees to fight for her freedom. Clenching a gloved fist with burning resolve, a silent vow of unwavering support is forged in the tense room. Meanwhile at the Sutherland estate, the monocled butler James stares forward with a sudden, deeply uneasy sense of impending dread. Marching aggressively into hostile territory, a thoroughly annoyed Ralph Garland glares fiercely as he arrives uninvited. Looming over the foolish intruder like an impenetrable wall, the imposing Sutherland family coldly glares down at the pathetic Garland delegation. Projecting absolute frigid authority, the Sutherland patriarch fiercely demands to know exactly why Ralph has dared to show his face today. Stammering under their crushing intimidation, the arrogant Ralph tries to forcefully assert his completely unfounded right to be there. Sweating profusely beside his master, the terrified butler James frantically whispers that barging in so aggressively was a truly catastrophic mistake. Narrowing his sharp eyes with dangerous curiosity, the intimidating Sutherland father coldly questions the foolish man's ridiculous audacity. Barking his demands with absurd confidence, the deeply delusional Ralph violently insists that he has come to retrieve his runaway wife. Sputtering with paranoid rage, Ralph wildly accuses the Sutherlands of orchestrating her disappearance, absolutely refusing to believe Cecilia left on her own. Shutting down his pathetic rant instantly, the stoic Sutherland brother firmly declares that his sister is absolutely not hiding in their mansion. Reeling from their icy denial, Ralph practically screams in disbelief as the Sutherlands reveal they have already received official court notifications regarding the separation. Spouting utterly nauseating delusions, the deeply oblivious Ralph blindly insists that he and Cecilia are deeply in love. Glaring at him like he is a complete lunatic, the disgusted brother sharply questions how Ralph could possibly be so blindly certain of such a ridiculous lie. Taking a bold, defensive step forward, the Sutherland family physically forms an impenetrable barrier of utter disdain. Staring blankly at the babbling fool, the entirely baffled Sutherland family practically radiates sheer, unadulterated contempt for his sheer stupidity. Struck entirely speechless by his absolute utter delusion, the entire family freezes in comical, thunderous disbelief at his complete lack of reality. Breaking the stunned silence, the furious brother bluntly questions his father's sanity for ever letting Cecilia marry such an unimaginably pathetic man. Trembling as his false reality shatters, Ralph sweats bullets as the crushing weight of their intense disgust finally begins to suffocate him. Refusing to back down, the arrogant husband violently demands to rip the mansion apart just to prove they are hiding his wife. Coldly inviting him to search every empty corner, the fiercely protective brother mocks Ralph's profound and pathetic misunderstanding of the situation. Sighing with profound exasperation, the brother brutally points out the utter absurdity of Ralph accusing them of kidnapping their own flesh and blood. Flashing back to a moment of sheer domestic panic, a frantic James bursts through the grand doors to announce a catastrophic problem regarding the ladies' room. Recalling his own arrogant dismissal, a terribly smug Ralph sips his tea while callously insulting Cecilia as a spoiled child who abandoned her duties. Reflecting on his past monumental stupidity, Ralph remembers foolishly assuming that completely ignoring her absence would simply make her return in shame. Stroking his chin with misplaced confidence, the arrogant lord remembers deciding to just let her supposedly cool down from her petty tantrum. Snapping the fool violently back to the harsh present, the Sutherland family drops the bombshell that Cecilia is actually miles away in the royal capital. Approaching the visibly shaken intruder, the Sutherland brother calmly steps forward to completely destroy what little hope Ralph has left. Delivering the ultimate fatal blow, the Sutherland heir grimly reveals that Cecilia entrusted him with the incredibly damning divorce papers to hand over personally. Reeling as if physically struck, a thoroughly devastated Ralph chokes on the impossible revelation that his docile wife fled to the royal capital. Trembling uncontrollably as he reads the tiny print, he stares in absolute horror at the business card of an elite capital lawyer. Thrusting the undeniably fatal legal documents directly into Ralph's shaking hands, the stern Sutherland brother finally seals the foolish man's doom. Staring down at the completely broken man, the Sutherland patriarch coldly asks if the undeniable reality has finally pierced his thick skull. Completely paralyzed by the absolute destruction of his arrogant worldview, the shell-shocked Ralph stares blankly into the abyss of his own monumental ruin. Cast out into the cold, unyielding courtyard, the deeply humiliated duo stares up at the massive, heavily locked doors of the Sutherland estate. Trembling beneath the crushing weight of their total defeat, the highly anxious butler James weakly calls out to his utterly destroyed master.